right. Well, good morning. As many of you I have met before, and for those of you that I haven't met before, my name is Jeff Jordan, President and Executive Creative Director at Rescue. And Rescue is a behavior change marketing, social marketing agency based in the United States. We're based in San Diego and have offices around the US, and we primarily work on public health. And so the reason all of my examples today will be public health, because that's where we focus on, but I'm hoping that these are applicable to all of the various issues that you work on around the world. And so what I want to talk to you about today is really understanding what exactly are we trying to change, and are we matching our strategy to the thing that we're trying to change amongst the people that we're really trying to affect. And what do I mean by this? Is that a lot of times when I ask people, well, what's your program? What's your audience? What are you trying to do? They'll tell me that they're trying to change X behavior, and sometimes they'll just tell me a place where they're trying to change that behavior, and that's everybody who lives in that place. Sometimes they'll get a little bit deeper and say, well, it'll be amongst the people who are not doing this right now in my chosen community, or all the adults, all the parents, all the young people, right? And that's great. It's a starting point. But in order to really understand what we're trying to change, we have to better understand not just who our audience is, but what it will take to get them to change that behavior that you're trying to affect. So what do I mean by this? Well, if you take any behavior out there, a commercial behavior, a health behavior, there's generally at least 3 different ways that we can look at the people who are in our communities. The first people we have are the doers. These are the people who are already doing the behavior that you want them to do, or if they knew about it, if they just knew like one piece of information about what this behavior was, they would immediately do it, because they are generally doers in this area that you're thinking about, right? So take an environmentalist who learns about a new way to be environmentally friendly. They would immediately adopt that behavior because it's part of their core identity, it's part of what they do. So whether they're currently engaging in the behavior or they would immediately be willing to engage in the behavior, these are the doers. These are the people in the circle, right? Now the doers are for the most part already out there doing it. So we often don't really need to reach them, unless we're in the rare situation where we are introducing a brand new behavior to the world that we would like to educate everybody about. Most of the time we are talking about a behavior that people already know about and many are choosing not to do, right? So the doers are usually not our audience. Outside of the doers, we have kind of the willing. And the willing are the people that are really open to doing this behavior. They like the idea of it. They think it would be good for them, but there are things in their way. Maybe it's too hard, maybe it's too expensive, maybe they don't have access to it, maybe their environment isn't conducive to this behavior. And to help these folks, oftentimes what we need to do is implement a program that makes a behavior easier for them. Right? These are things from adding bike lanes in our community, to decreasing the cost of healthy foods, to solving food deserts. By changing some of the environmental factors, we can take the people who are willing to do this behavior and make it easier for them, reduce the burden of that behavior, so that they will, in effect, choose to engage in that behavior, right? So they're willing to do it, they just can't right now. And we don't help them by, banging them over the head with the message of you should be doing this. We help them by actually figuring out what's getting in your way and how can I help you get to that behavior. But then we have the hardest audience of all, and that's the non-willing. These are the people that currently today do not want to engage in your behavior. Now, these are my favorite people, because these are the folks that challenge us to move away from our own values and our own worldview and challenge us to look at the world in a different way, look at it from their perspective. Why would it be that this behavior that I think is such a good idea, is such an important thing for people to do, is something that someone else is completely unwilling and uninterested in doing? In social marketing, our biggest challenges is often affecting this group of the non-willing. And depending on who it is that we're talking to, whether it's the doers, the willing, or the non-willing, we have completely different messages, strategies, and programs that we need to implement. Doers, it's really more about awareness. Doers just need to know that it exists. And doers often are the audience of commercial marketing campaigns. Because most commercial marketing, and not all, I'm going to show you a few that don't actually fit in this bucket, but most commercial marketing campaigns are focused on people who already engage in the required behavior and are simply trying to convince them to use their brand instead of someone else's, right? A car commercial isn't trying to reach people who ride bicycles. It's trying to reach people who already have a car and trying to convince them to drive their car, right? A bank isn't trying to reach conspiracy theorists that are against banks, right? They're trying to reach people who already have bank accounts and trying to convince them to use their bank account instead of someone else's. The vast majority of commercial marketing fits into this bucket of doers and is trying to create not just awareness, but kind of likability and brand affinity and all these things to get those doers to do with them, right? To do it with their product. And the reason I point this out is because a lot of times we get hung up on seeing some great commercial campaign for some product and thinking, oh, I want to do that exact thing, and not realizing that that thing caused no behavior change. All it did was change preferences amongst people who were already willing to engage in that behavior or were already engaging in it. So that's the world of awareness. Most of the time, we don't need to be in this bubble. The only time we need to be in this bubble is if you have a brand new behavior. And for most of us, that's not the case. So we move on to the willing group. And willing is all about ability. And so this is where we're focused more on changing the world around somebody, right? Making it easier for them, possibly teaching them, possibly providing support, etc. Right? It's not so much about convincing them because they're already convinced. It's about helping them. So, ability. And then the last group, it's about reimagining the world. It's about finding a story, finding a connection that will help this person realize that this behavior that you want them to do is actually in their best interest, can actually fit into their worldview, and can be a part of what they want to achieve in their own lives. And this actually requires that we imagine a world that currently doesn't exist for this person. A world where their norms, their identity aligns with the behavior that today it completely doesn't align. And this is really challenging. Now, a lot of times, we get stuck in that initial bubble of the doers. And what happens a lot of times with the doers is something that I like to call the yogurt commercial fallacy. And the yogurt commercial fallacy is that we make health campaigns for healthy people, that they look like healthy people. They are full of skinny, happy people. They're full of people that are obviously have no issues in their world, have always just had a perfect life, like this wonderful lady who eats lots of yogurt. And what we don't realize is that that is only for those people in that doer bubble, right? Only the people in that bubble will look at that and say, yes, that's for me. And that actually sells a whole ton of health products, right? This is why we keep getting hung up in it. It's because it actually works in commercial marketing. In commercial marketing, you sell health products to health people. So every single healthy campaign out there looks like this because these are the people who already buy those products. Our campaigns should almost never look like campaigns for healthy people if you're working in health. Because you're trying not to reach the people that are already engaging in healthy behaviors. You're trying to engage in the people who don't engage in healthy behaviors and who look at this lady and say, that is not me, that is not my life. How are you so skinny all the time? Right? Those are the people that we want to reach, and that means that we can't make things that look like yogurt commercials. We have to make things that are different. And there's actually a spectacular example of this that I think all of us are probably aware of. And that's the Got Milk campaign. The Got Milk campaign started back in the early 90s in California and eventually expanded nationally in the US. And its goal was to increase milk consumption because milk consumption was reducing. And it was by the actual producers of milk. They all got together and they funded this campaign. And this campaign is so famous. How many of you that are not from the United States have heard of Got Milk? Right? Everyone knows about it. And how many people have heard of Got Something Else that has copied Got Milk? Right? It happens all the time because this campaign's so popular, so pervasive. All these celebrities that did it, everybody knew about it. This is the dream of an awareness-focused health communicator. Everyone knew about this thing. Every celebrity was engaged in it. It was awesome, and it didn't work. Right? The Got Milk campaign did not increase milk consumption. Milk consumption continued to decrease at the same rate that it was decreasing before the campaign started. And why didn't it increase? Because it was focused on awareness. It was focused on just bringing awareness to milk and the fallacy that if more people just were reminded about milk, they would drink it. What did that change about the world? What did that change about the reasons why I was choosing to drink less milk or why my kids were choosing to drink less milk? It didn't change anything. It just showed me that, wow, look, rappers drink milk. Well, that's pretty cool, right? But it didn't actually change any of the underlying things that were going on. Now, if this exact campaign with every single thing that it did was for a brand of milk, a certain milk, they would have increased their sales and taken milk consumers from all the other milk brands because milk drinkers loved it, right? It was a great campaign to increase awareness of a specific brand of milk. So it would have worked if all they were trying to do was sell one brand's milk, because it would have just cannibalized everybody else. But because they were trying to make that circle bigger, it didn't work. And that's the key difference, is that selling a product to groups of people that are already engaged in the product looks like one thing, but getting more people to engage in a behavior looks totally different. Now, we know that promotion alone is not social marketing. And so I'm going to translate this exact statement just a little bit different, which is that awareness alone will not cause change. Just making people aware of an issue, for the most part, will not change their behaviors. Now, again, you have that unique situation of a brand new behavior that no one's ever heard of. Yeah, a little bit of awareness may cause a little bit of change. But for the most part, we're not talking about those. We're talking about behaviors that people already know about. So in order to cause change, we first have to define what kind of behavior change we're trying to do. What does it actually mean? Are we talking about someone who needs help performing this behavior? Are we talking about someone who's not willing to engage in this behavior? Because that's going to define what kind of strategy we put together. And all of these campaigns that end up stuck in that bubble of doers, right? All of them that are stuck with the yogurt commercial fallacy are campaigns that did not define this at the beginning, that said everybody in my community is the same, I'm going to talk to everybody, and then I'm going to make them all aware of this behavior. And I guarantee you that there are campaigns that we're unfortunately involved with, all of us in the room, that are stuck here, because it is hard to move people out of this area. I'd be the first to tell you, our client education is kind of the first step in any contract, because this is what people want, because this is what they see. They see health campaigns that look like this, selling health products, and they think that that's what we're supposed to do, right? And if it doesn't look the same, it feels weird. Well, I'm here to tell you that it should feel weird. Your campaign your program should not feel like the world that exists today. It should look like the world that you're trying to create. And that takes bravery, and that takes imagination. So let's talk a little bit about this non-willing group. Because this non-willing group is where these stories can really have a huge impact. Stories that actually change them. What does this look like? We can change the norms of these folks by telling stories that change people's perceptions about themselves and their cultures, right? People have a certain view of what their life should be like, of how they should behave, of what their culture is like. You can actually tell a story that challenges that perception. And that's how culture change has happened for decades. Stories that change people create new connections between their values and their behaviors. It lets them know that this thing you've always cared about, that you've always wanted in your life, actually is connected to this behavior. And let me give you this authentic voice, this authentic story to explain to you how it works. Now, earlier I told you that not all commercial campaigns fit into that bubble. Most of them do, but not all of them. Occasionally, the commercial world needs to expand the bubble. The commercial world needs to find new people who currently do not engage in a specific behavior, and a specific brand will drive new people into the bubble, right? And of course, if you're the brand who brought people in, you've got a really nice connection to that customer. It's very powerful. It's a good kind of long-term strategy for you, but it's very hard, right? It's much more expensive to do it. Think about it from kind of the bank situation, right? If you're the bank that convinced the conspiracy theorist to bank, that conspiracy theorist is probably going to bank with you for the rest of their life, but it's going to take a lot of work to do it. So they don't normally do this, but occasionally they do need to do this. And one of the examples of how some of these unhealthy norms have begun is one of the most famous examples, is the tobacco industry. Right? So the tobacco industry had a big problem in the early parts of the 19th century. Their problem was that cigarettes were associated with men, and it was taboo for women to smoke. And so their goal was, how do we get women into this circle, the circle of smoking, right? It's a smoky circle. How do we get them in there? And what they did was they said, well, let's find a value that some women at the time will have that we can associate with smoking. And the value that they found was independence. they found that they could associate women's independence with the idea of smoking a cigarette. Why? Because cigarettes were associated with men, and by smoking a cigarette, you were essentially bucking this cultural norm, this gender norm. And so essentially, all of the kind of women movements that were going on at the time, it kind of fit that narrative, it fit that idea, and every brand that was trying to target women pretty much of the tobacco industry started to adopt this strategy. Here you see some old ads from both Virginia Slims and Lucky Strikes. And unfortunately for us, it worked. And it's because of this reimagination of the reality that women began to smoke, and many women, unfortunately, died because of that changed reality. And so now we have to, try and undo it in our own way. We can't do it by telling women that you shouldn't be smoking. We have to tell it by providing now a new reality of why it is that people shouldn't smoke. And some countries like the US have gotten further along by this, thanks to changing some of those norms. And so in this case, when we look at kind of, well, what's the value and what's the behavior, we have the value of being an independent woman with the behavior of smoking cigarettes. Now, that was 70, 80 years ago. This continues today. Any industry that wants to expand its circle is going to need to create new associations in the world. And one of my favorite ones that I've seen recently is this one.
Whoever said that's so impossible, or that's not supposed to go there, doesn't know me well, 'cause I know that today holds more, yeah, so much more, so much more. So much more.
Well, who would have thought eating chips is all you needed to do to save the world, right? So what did SUNCHIPS do here is they took the value of being environmentally conscious, right? And they associated it with the idea of eating chips. Now, these two things don't really have much to do with each other, or in fact, they may actually be contrary to each other in some ways, depending on many of the other details about how this product is actually manufactured, where it comes from, all these questions that we have if we're really going to take a critical environmental eye at it. But the point is that they were reimagining the world, right? This isn't the world that exists. Environmentalists don't run around talking about biodegradable chip bags as kind of their main strategy, but SUNCHIPS wanted to expand that circle, wanted to bring more people into the circle of their brand, and that's how they did it. And that's their prerogative as a commercial brand. But the point is looking, this is how reimagination happens. Let me show you one more example.
Sometimes you wanna go where everybody knows your name, and they're always glad you came. You wanna be where you can see our troubles are all the same. You wanna be where everybody knows your name. You wanna go where people are all the same. You wanna go where everybody knows your name.
Every time I finish my CrossFit session, all I want is a crisp beer to just wrap it up. I love showing this commercial because it feels so weird, right? You look at it and you're like, no, wait, what are they doing? They need water, they need protein, they need vitamins, they need electrolytes, they need anything but beer in that moment, right? But what Michelob Ultra is doing here is they want to reimagine the world. They want to reimagine the world as a place where all these social fitness people drink when they're done with their fitness. Now, trainers are pissed because my trainer has always told me, you booze, you lose. And so it's a really, really complicated kind of idea to imagine that, well, could this actually work? And if you want to know if it'll work or not, go to a marathon, go to a 5K in your community, particularly one that's more popular with young adults, and look at who the vendors are and look at what's happening at the end of that event. Because yes, it is working, right? These kind of low-calorie beers are now being associated with kind of socializing after fitness because someone reimagined the world that way. This doesn't come out of nowhere. It comes out of people saying, this is how I want the world to be, and I'm going to use marketing to make it that way. Now, probably doesn't make most of us happy in the room, but these tools are available to you as well. All you have to do is realize is that your goal is not to just kind of tell people about a healthy behavior or push a healthy behavior. Your goal is to reimagine the world. Tell a story that challenges the way things currently work. And to do that, we have to find stories that actually challenge these norms and these identities. A lot of times we put out messages, we put out programs that just reinforce everything, that just reinforce who's supposed to be doing healthy things, who's not supposed to be doing healthy things. We don't actually mix those two together. And oftentimes, I particularly work a lot in youth prevention, we make things that just look like stock photos, right? Why is it that health always has to look like a stock photo? Why is it that healthy campaigns always have to include a perfectly multicultural group of teenagers that are happy? I guarantee you none of these kids do drugs, smoke cigarettes, drink alcohol, but I guarantee you that all of them have been featured in a campaign against smoking, against drugs, against alcohol, right? This is what it's called to kind of reinforce the world as it currently is, right? Because obviously you don't do drugs in the library. So please stop using images of kids in the library in your prevention campaigns. So what does it look like when we actually challenge those things? Well, we have to first find a connection between one of their values and the behavior we want. And the first thing you gotta do is the hardest thing you gotta do, which is set your own values aside. Set the reasons why you want people to engage in this behavior aside and focus fully on who your audience is. And I'm talking about a segmented audience, right? I'm not just talking about anybody. So let me give you a quick example.
I own every part of who I am, even the pieces I thought I had to hide. I've learned to embrace my complexity and reject any threat to it. Like smoking, which can damage nearly every part of my body. And I refuse to damage any part of who I am by smoking cigarettes.
This free life, freedom to be tobacco-free.
So this is part of a national LGBT tobacco prevention campaign in the US. And this Free Life, I encourage you to check it out if you work with any kind of LGBT audience, because the beauty of this campaign is that its focus is on associating the identity of being an LGBT person with being tobacco-free. And the reason it's doing that is because today, LGBT people are significantly more likely to smoke than heterosexual people. And so in this case, it was self-protection and acceptance. The idea that, everything I've gone through, everything it's taken me to kind of come to accept who I am, I'm not going to damage that with tobacco. And that's a different way of looking at it than looking at it as like, tobacco's bad for you, so you shouldn't do it. Well, what does that have to do with me being LGBT? And that's when we talk about kind of putting different narratives into the world, putting different people into the world. This is a young woman who would never normally be associated with a health campaign, right? She doesn't look like your typical healthy ambassador. She doesn't look like the typical person who would talk about health, and that's the point. That's how we change things. To do this, though, to identify a voice, we have to have a specific audience. We can't just say it's everybody in a group. In this case, it was LGBT young adults. But for other audiences, we have to really narrow down who it is that we're talking about. We can't just talk about parents or adults or teenagers. Many of you have heard me talk about segmentation before, and we talk about teen peer crowd segmentation a lot. If you want to learn more about this, we do have the workshop tomorrow. Still seats available, so be sure to sign up. What this segmentation model tells us, in the US, there's 5 common peer crowds that we have, groups of young people's culture that they identify with: mainstream, popular, hip hop, country, and alternative. And each ones have different risk profiles. And so when we do our work with young people, we focus on, well, which one of these groups are actually at risk? Because we found that each one of them has a completely different risk profile. And depending on what the behavior you're talking about is, you're going to be talking to a different audience. If you're talking about cigarettes, you should be talking to alternative or hip hop. If you want to talk about chew tobacco, you should be talking to country. If you want to talk about vaping, you should be talking to the popular kids. If you want to talk about suicide prevention, you should be talking to the alternative kids, et cetera, because those are the behaviors that are most common amongst those audiences. But the important reason that we segment, and the important reason that you should segment based on psychographics and not demographics, is because you want to find those values. You want to find those unique values that bring a specific audience together. And here's just a sampling of some of the values that we've tested with different peer crowds. And you can see things like, I'm a patriotic person. 71% of American country teens agree with this, while only 27% of hip hop teens do. I care about being fashionable. It's 59 and 54% of hip hop and popular teens, but it's only 27% of country teens. I care about protecting the environment is 82% of alternative teens, but only 59% of country teens. Right? So there's huge differences in what these young people care about if you segment them the right way. And imagine kind of having all these groups in a single focus group trying to decide what your strategy is going to be. It's just impossible. It's impossible. And so what we end up with is what we call lowest common denominator creative. And that's what it looks like when we have very diverse people in our audience and we can't really get deep with any one of them. We end up trying to find the lowest common denominator across all of them. And that isn't a story that changes people. That ends up just looking generic and just looking like it's for everybody, but it's not for me, right? So let me show you a few last examples of kind of what peer crowd targeted stories can look like, really challenging the norms in each of these communities.
Big Crit, KRIT, it stands for King Remember the Time. I'm known for making that gritty, southern, humble country music. The journey didn't start just going straight to Atlanta. It started from going from Meridian, Mississippi to Birmingham, Alabama, and then to Atlanta. And from that point, that's when the journey got really real. Pretty much being homeless, living in hotel rooms, by myself, 18, 19 years old. It showed me that I'm strong enough, and I'm talented enough, and I'm creative enough, and I come from a place where people don't even expect that. What I've noticed nowadays is that a lot of people are using their vices to be creative, and all you're doing is handicapping yourself. The way I feel about tobacco is that it's not for me, because knowing that it's the leading cause of preventable death in the US is crazy. We all need to be healthy. We all need to be in our tip-top shape, 100% to go out here and do what we do every single day, no matter what. It's that Mississippi native Big Crit, and I keep it fresh and tobacco-free with Fresh Empire.
So this is another federal campaign that we work on. And when we first started with this campaign, and we did research with hip-hop teens, we had decided our audience was going to be hip-hop teens. The thing we heard over and over again was, well, every rapper smokes. Every rapper in their studios, in their music videos, they all smoke, and so that's why, we smoke. That's why it's a part of our culture. It's just what all the cool people do. And so immediately at the beginning, we said we need to engage as many influencers as we possibly can, as many authentic hip-hop influencers, to challenge that norm, to express the fact that they don't smoke, because we knew that wasn't true, but teens didn't. And then we needed to add on top of it, well, it's not just that they don't smoke, it's that they see not smoking as a part of how they achieve their goals and how they succeed within their culture. And so if you look at the Fresh Empire campaign, you'll see this narrative across the board that tobacco will get in the way of you achieving your culturally relevant goals. The goals that the path that you saw for yourself is actually a tobacco-free path. Look at all these people within your culture, right? Not someone who looks like a typical health commercial kind of guy, right? An actual hip-hop artist who's letting you know that tobacco is just going to get in the way of what you want. And that speaks to a specific audience that didn't see the world that way before they saw this. They saw the world as every single rapper I know smokes, and so if I want to be cool and I want to be successful, I should smoke too. Let's look at another example.
When I was 13, I was bullied by a group of kids in my middle school. Now, I stand up for anyone tormented by bullies, and that means standing up to Big Tobacco. They gave cigarettes to psychiatric facilities, taking advantage of those already fighting to find their own identities. People walked into these hospitals looking for help and healing, but thanks to the tobacco industry, they walked out of these hospitals addicted. Today, 45% of all people who smoke cigarettes are also living with mental illness. Coincidence, or exactly what the tobacco industry planned? Join me in taking a stand against big tobacco, because some things are just unforgivable. Learn more about big tobacco's unethical practices at theblacklisters.com.
So this campaign is focused on alternative teens, and alternative teens are so in tune to mental health. They have felt bullied in their life. They like to stand up for people who have been bullied. And so the idea of connecting this idea of a world that's anti-bullying, that stands up against these evils, and connecting that with being anti-tobacco is something that is very unexpected for many of them. When we show this particular ad in focus groups, it is like no other ad that we've ever shown. For alternative teens, this thing strikes at the core of who they see themselves as and who they want to be. Someone who is against all of this. And when we make them think about tobacco use as what are the corporate practices you are supporting rather than just what are you doing to your body, it changes the world for them. It changes how they look at tobacco in their life. And it's extremely powerful. And here's one last example.
My family has a deep legacy around here, and we look out for each other. My folks and their relatives, my aunt and the little ones, even grandma down the way. We got each other's backs. Even when it comes to my little brother, he's really something, but he's one of the reasons I live tobacco-free. Because if I use tobacco, my little brother is more likely to use it too, and that can cause him cancer down the line. I can't be the reason he does that. So for my family, I live tobacco-free. Go to downanddirtyva.com/lookingout.
Welcome to the American countryside. So Down and Dirty is a country-targeted campaign, and one of the key values of country teens more than any other teens is this connection to family and this protection of their own family. And the idea that this teen is living tobacco-free, not just for himself, but because he can't be the reason that later in life his younger brother gets cancer, is a whole different way of thinking about his own behaviors and his own responsibilities. And so with each of these campaigns, we have this connection. And what I would challenge you to think is that, in social marketing, we often talk about, well, our brand could be our product. If you do it the right way, if it's targeted, if it's associated with the right people, you can actually have a brand that in itself is a product. And I would argue that we can go one step further. And this reimagination of the world, this new association that you're forming, that it can be your product, that introducing this new connection, introducing this new way of looking at the world, can be the thing that your program introduces to the world, that new ingredient that's added to the behavioral equation of people that convinces them to change. But in order for it to work, it has to be new, right? Because if it's not new, then you're not really introducing anything to the world. You have not put something there that wasn't there before. And that's what our programs have to do, is they have to change the world in order to reach these non-willing people. We have to reimagine the world for them. Because it's our job, right? If we can't do it, and it's our job, and we get paid to do this, if we can't picture what the world should look like, how do we expect them to do it, right? How can we expect them to bear that burden? So in summary, 3 quick items to make sure that you're telling stories that change people. The first one is segmentation, and segmentation using psychographics. I can't stress that enough. Demographics were who we were born as. Psychographics is who we are today based on the life that we've lived. We have to use psychographics or else we won't understand who our audiences truly are. Then we have to associate the audience values that they have with the behavior. We have to find a value and find the way that it can come together. And then finally, we have to tailor those messages using their culture, their identity, and their audience. And this is something that we'll be talking a lot about. If you're interested in more of this kind of work, join us in San Diego in February for Agents of Change. There's some flyers on some of the chairs. And with that, I thank you very much.